So John Jones nearly caught an attempted murder charge, and I'm going to say that in the most exaggerated way possible. Simply because you have to understand, a lot of the people that work in the drug testing agencies don't understand the culture of fighters. They don't understand the nature of the business. And furthermore, I would go as far as to say many of them have serious problems when it comes to overstepping their authority, just like anybody else that is in position of power. Okay? And this is the reason why we have corrupted police officers. This is the reason why we have criminals in any element of society that you can think of. But at the same time, this is also the same reason why we have to be very skeptical of these matters whenever, let's say, an authority figure sort of oversteps or exaggerates their story in any kind of way towards their favor. And we must also be objective and understand that, yes, John Jones's history and his nature about him in terms of being a violent human being also has to be put into consideration, because these things you cannot correlate, you can't correlate a certain issue or an event like this without putting it together. Okay, but at the same time, you must also understand and differentiate when none of these historical events and data that we can gather out of John Jones is completely unnecessary. You have to decipher that. In this case, I got to tell you, I'm going to give you the most objective truth possible when it comes to what had happened with John Jones and why we are here in terms of the exaggeration that has come about in this particular story. For one, you got to understand the end of the video that you saw coming out of John Jones's house and his cameras showed that there was a positive interaction with him and the two drug testers, and in particular, the young lady that was present at the time, that, by the way, was the one who called the police on John Jones, was also told by the UFC to not call the police or press charges in any kind of way. And we're going to talk about that as well, because that's actually an important part of the entire story that we're going to try to convey here. So it was a positive interaction. What do I make out of that? For one, you have to understand this. There's always going to be positive interactions, and then later on, people having a bad taste in their mouth. Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say in a hypothetical scenario, I meet somebody, and let's just say that it's not a positive interaction. We shout at each other, we curse at each other, and at the end, we sort of give each other a high five because we have this understanding of, well, the miscommunication that may have happened, or perhaps maybe the situation that may have resolved the entire issue. But the overall bad taste in your mouth will probably lead you to, let's say, act in a certain way, or perhaps give you a certain leverage in terms of maybe telling or snitching on that person. I.e., let's say if it's a workplace environment, right? You have this shouting match with a co-employee of yours or a coworker. And then all of a sudden, you think to yourself, man, you know what? I didn't like the way that I was talked down to. I didn't like the way that I was harassed. I didn't like the way that I was scolded. So I'm going to go and do something about it. So then, like the little snitch that you are, and the little punk that you are, and the little coward that you are, maybe you would go and write a little letter to your boss, or maybe if you're the one in position of power, you would go and reprimand that person because you feel a certain way. Or let's say if you're a police officer and you pull somebody over and you know that they had no any evidence of them speeding in any kind of way, but you somehow manipulate the situation into your favor as a police officer based on the fact that you can manipulate the evidence, based on the fact that you can have a situation where it's your word over theirs, and things of that nature. This is sort of what is happening in this particular instance with John Jones and the drug testers. Now, we got to understand something. Did the drug testers have any right to invade John Jones's privacy in any matter of any degree? No. At the same time, you also got to understand that these types of drug testing situations are supposed to be candid and, quite frankly, unnoticeable to the eyes of the athlete, or undetected, and better yet, non-prepared, to the point where you catch them in the most unusual times in order to get the best results of perhaps maybe catching somebody cheating or doping or doing any illegal substance that is not allowed under whatever jurisdiction this athletic commission or drug testing agency or league that is asked of these agents. So that is the name of the game. You have to catch them when they least expect it. That is the name of the game. However, there is the other aspect of invading one's privacy, but also the aspect of sort of overstepping the line in terms of what it is that you're supposed to do as opposed to what you should do. And also a little bit of a miscommunication that happens in between. Now, we also have to take into consideration John Jones was intoxicated. And to be quite honest with you, this is not something I would approve of. Obviously, I don't drink, I don't do any of these types of substances to any degree. So therefore, you're never going to catch me in a inebriated situation where my moral choices are going to be compromised or somehow influenced by the situation. Unlike John Jones, obviously he lives his own life. He's his own man. He's a world champion. He does what he does. He's allowed to do what he wants to do under the jurisdiction of the laws that we live in this land. So in that case, it's really not the worst thing in the world for him to be drunk. And by the way, on one of his friend's birthday that he decided to host in his own house. So therefore, I may not agree with it. I may not agree with the lifestyle, but he has the right to do so. With that in mind, let me tell you what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to step over the line when it comes to talking to, let's say, an athlete in any kind of way. But then you're also not allowed to talk to these drug testers in any kind of way where you can make them feel threatened to any degree. Now, here's the thing about this, right? John Jones is a person that has a violent streak about him. And here's something that you have to understand. If you're dealing with people that have a violent streak, you have to tread very carefully in how you're going to deal with them. I don't care who you are. I don't care what point you're trying to prove. If you know that person has a violent tendency, you need to back up and you need to know your role and you need to know what it is that you need to do in order to prevent yourself from being in that situation. Especially if the person is going to be reasonable enough in a way where they're not going to be combative towards you. But here's the problem with this particular story, because you know I have to take objective takes and give you advocacy for both sides. This woman, for whatever reason, felt threatened by John Jones. And what is the details of that? Well, we still have to find out a little bit more of what had happened, but also understand what are the plausible conclusions that came out of this whole entire event. So as a result, you have to thread carefully, but with John Jones, guess what? He also has to thread carefully. If you have a violent reputation and a violent history, sometimes it is really incumbent upon you to either make that person feel safe or, for whatever reason, give them no reason to think otherwise when it comes to maybe reprisals or violent reactions of any kind. In this case, John Jones did none of that, and being inebriated and drunk and out of his mind based on having a few little drinks sort of influenced his actions as a result. Now, here's another thing that I think is really important to point out. The UFC told this drug tester to not call the police. Here's the thing, right? And I'm sorry to say this. Unfortunately, this woman had every right to call the police if she wanted. But if that was me, in all honesty, do you think that I would call the police? Absolutely not. For one, I would not treat John Jones in a certain way. I would not treat him in a hostile manner. But you also have to understand that when it comes to women in these particular positions, especially drug testers, you have to understand that they are trying to uphold their careers, but at the same time, they're also trying to do a little bit too much. They're also trying to prove a point to whatever degree. I'll give you an example. I used to work for a financial mortgage corporation, right? And I'm not going to mention which name, but you could imagine, well, I don't want you to imagine, I don't want you to know, but just know that I worked for this specific company. And there were a few women that, let's say, were trainers in that particular field, right? And I had noticed that a lot of them had how do I say this, real serious power struggle issues. In other words, for example, we would sit in this desk, right, to be trained towards our job, how to work the computers, how to work the spreadsheets, and how to take phone calls to direct them to one person to the other, or how to work on certain papers and how to write documents on certain subjects of the work matter at hand. And sometimes, I got to be honest with you, I'm not the type of person that likes to sit all day, especially not at a desk, right? I'm not that kind of person. I don't like to sit. I don't like to just sit there and break my back and have all these underlying health problems based on the fact that I'm just sitting around all day like a slug. That's not who I am. I'm an athletic person. I'm a person that likes to stretch. I'm a person that cares about my body. I'm a person that cares about my overall health. So, guess what? In between that, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk, and I'm going to do what I need to do to better myself, to stretch out or whatever. And for whatever reason, these power hungry people in their position are telling me, oh, sit down. Or why? Because guess what? For whatever reason, they felt intimidated that somebody like myself, who's strapping young Chad of a man, is standing. And for whatever reason, maybe that makes them feel intimidated because I'm standing with a very strong figure of myself in front of them. And maybe that's threatening to some people. Maybe that's a microaggression to lesser and weaker people. But the bottom line is, if I'm not threatening you in any way, you shouldn't care about what it is that I do. And here's the thing that I have to say about that particular relatable subject to these drug testers, and in particular, this woman that called the police on John Jones, which she was instructed not to do so by the UFC. If you're there to pick up urine samples from this athlete, that is your job and that is all you need to do. You don't need to do any other extra stuff. You don't need to tell them how to do it. You don't need to say anything extra. You don't need to try to prove your point for whatever reason you have. John Jones is not your husband that you go home to, that you talk down to, or whatever it is that you do in your personal life. Whoever this Crystal Martinez person is. So, by the way, that's her name. If you're wondering who this drug tester is, I'll just tell you flat out. Her name is Crystal Martinez from the whatever drug agency that I believe the UFC has now taken under their wing, aside from USADA, because obviously this is the post-USADA era. So that's the thing with whoever her name is, Crystal Martinez, and any other gentleman that was with them, Jerome, the other agent. And yeah, that's, and by the way, I'm not doxing these people in any way. This is public information that you can look up. This is literally the name of the drug tester that was involved in this whole fiasco. But at the same time, let's also talk about the choice of words that John Jones has used that made this woman feel threatened in every kind of way. Because once again, I have to play advocate on this particular matter, and this is something a lot of channels don't do. What they do is they act like emotional women, sort of taking one side over the other and not really looking at objective takes on the matter at hand that they are facing. In other words, they want to take one narrative, meaning that the one narrative is, well, John Jones is free of guilt of any of these things, and this BICTH should not have overstepped her boundaries. And then the other side of this argument is that, well, John Jones should have cooperated. Okay, and here's the thing, I'm giving you both, because let me tell you something that a lot of people don't understand before I get into the choice of words that John Jones said. What a lot of people don't do when they talk about other people, they don't talk about, let's say, the bad things that they do. You see this all the time. You see this in court cases, which, by the way, is reasonable, especially if you're fighting for your own narrative. But you also see this amongst arguments with people. For example, you see a lot of people who are backbiters. They tell other people something to the extent of, well, you know what? Me and this person are beefing, or we have conflict because such and such. Okay, well, what did you do? This is something a lot of people never say. And by the way, before I go into what John Jones said, I'm going to tell you like this to sort of qualify myself in this situation. Whenever I have a conflict with a human being or other people, I'm not one to dismiss myself to any guilt whatsoever. I will tell you straight up, yeah, I talked to that person in this kind of way because I felt like it, because I was angry, and because of that anger, I wanted to react in this kind of manner, and I wanted to be spiteful, and I wanted to be vengeful, and I wanted to get at this person in the most harshest way possible, and that's that. But a lot of people are not going to do that. What they're going to do is gaslight you into thinking that they are the victims and they did nothing wrong. And as a result, they should be exempt totally from the whole situation. And this is the reason why a lot of you get a one sided story of an entire conversation or entire conflict that you're trying to learn. And that goes with all types of conflicts, micro conflicts or macro conflicts, domestic affairs or foreign and abroad affairs in terms of geopolitics. So all of these are correlated. Now let's get to what John Jones said to this woman. What he said to this woman was, "Do you know what I do to people here?" Meaning that if you don't know anything about John Jones, there have been people that came to his house and tried to either enter wrongfully or for whatever reason trespass. And John Jones has pulled out his strap and busted his gun, rightfully so, like he has every right to do so as an American, and especially New Mexico. If you know anything about New Mexico, bro, let me tell you, it ain't like California. Because out here, even though in California we gangbang and we have problems with violence and things of that nature, guess what? You have very strict laws in terms of when you can discharge your weapon. But in New Mexico, baby, that is the Wild West. You go and you come to somebody's home in New Mexico, you better be prepared for a gunfight. And guess what? That is what John Jones did in the past and what he's done to a lot of people. But also on the heroic side, and to many people's pleasure and agreeance to his behavior, John Jones has also fired shots at protesters or rioters during the pandemic in 2020, right? So a lot of people can look at it from two sides of the fence. So once again, John Jones has every right to do this, and he has a very fierce reputation, not only in the cage, but also as, I mean, for lack of a better term, a straight up gangster outside of the cage, which he has every right to do so. He owns all his guns legally. He's not involved in any illegal activities. He owns his own property, and he owns many cars that he has to protect. He has a family and his house that he has to protect as well. Of course, that goes without saying with the little mishaps that he had going on in the Las Vegas hotel at the night of his Hall of Fame inductee. But that's neither here or there. However, still sort of a history and a data that you can look at and say, wow, this is an extremely dangerous person to deal with. So as a result, I have to thread very carefully. But for John Jones to say these particular words to a woman, unfortunately, that is the reason why she went to the police and told them exactly what had happened. And now she's trying to somehow have John Jones caught up in some charges of terroristic threats, right? Which, by the way, are serious. Now, does she have every right to do that? According to the UFC, no. Because here's the thing. You are working for a company. When you are a drug tester, you're not a cop. And here's the problem with a lot of people and their perception of drug testers. They think of drug testers as official police officers, but they're not. Especially if you come from another country like Russia or China or all these other countries that have, let's say, much more stricter rules in terms of authority figures and whatnot. You're going to view it as such. You're going to view them as, well, okay, maybe they're the police, so maybe perhaps there's a certain authority that they have. But if you're an American and you understand the difference between them, especially John Jones, here's something a lot of you don't know about John Jones before his UFC career. Did you know that this brother right here was going to go into the police force right before he was going to enter into his pro career? This is the type of guy that he is. Also, here's another crazy aspect about John Jones that I think is worth noting. John Jones was the type of guy to snitch on his whole entire roommates in college when they're smoking weed. And by the way, this was when weed was not as legal as it is now. So I want you to put that in perspective to understand what kind of man this is, what kind of man he was, and what kind of man he has currently become. Because it seems that he became the complete opposite of that, for better or worse. But I got to tell you, this is the truthful aspect of John Jones and the entire objective take in which I can give you advocacy for both sides. Now, let's talk about this woman and her calling the police and the UFC telling her not to do so. So, like I said, UFC is a business. You are an employee of the UFC, the drug testing agents. So, in other words, there's a certain level of compliance that you have to play in order to stay at float with this particular organization. Because guess what? The UFC at this current moment of time, they can just literally refuse to have any drug testing agents. Do you think that that would change the bottom line of their game? Because here's the thing, when it comes to sports athletic commissions, that's all that you really need in order to start an event. You don't need all these other guys. Guess what? All these drug testing agents are nothing more than an insurance policy, so that if something goes wrong with the fighters, i.e., let's say a very serious injury that goes on in a fight during the time of an event or during the time of competition, they can use that as sort of an insurance policy as to say, well, these are the measures that we took in order to prevent these tragic matters at hand that took place in the cage. That is all that they are. And they can easily drop them at the dime of a hat if they wish to do so. But the reason why they don't is because obviously they still need them in order to sort of fulfill that insurance role that the UFC needs to have. So that is the reason why. So at the same time, there's a lot of people out there who are John Jones fans, or people that are anti-police, or people that are anti-authority figures, which, by the way, I can completely sympathize and understand, that would have the narrative as to say that she should not have gone to the cops and taken the side of the UFC, taken the side of John Jones. And here's the thing. You want my honest opinion? I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, because it's just not what I would do. But at the same time, if I was a drug tester, I think that I would have a much better interaction with John Jones than, let's say, some overbearing woman who is trying to try a little way too hard at her job. Okay, you're there to pick up urine. That's it. You're not there to do anything else. You're there to pick up urine, transport urine, make sure that the urine is intact in terms of not being contaminated other than what is presented to you by the athlete. That is your only job. Your job is not to go there and make a point with these athletes or to try to somehow convey your message that you are the authority figure in this particular matter at hand. No, that's not your job. Make it simple. Pick up the piss, get the hell out of there, because you're not needed for anything else. And I'm sorry to say if that's very demeaning or somehow rude or anything like that. That's just a matter of fact. Okay, matters of facts don't have feelings. And maybe perhaps this is the problem with this whole entire story, is that there's just way too many feelings involved. But also, you got to understand there's a lot of feelings in John Jones's part either. Let me tell you what I would not do if I was John Jones. There is no way, under any circumstances, would I remind anybody of my violent history, especially when it is just a simple procedure of perhaps maybe just presenting my piss to a drug testing agent, and that's it. I go to the bathroom, I pee in a cup. If you need to see that I'm not cheating, peeing in a cup in any way, okay, do what you need to do, but I'm here to prove my innocence. But this leads me to the next question at hand. Is John Jones cheating in terms of drug enhancements and anything that he's trying to hide that may contaminate his results? Well, I gotta tell you, man, where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, we're talking about picograms and all this other stuff during the Alexander Gustafsson fight, having to have the fight move, by the way, from Las Vegas all the way to the Forum in LA, because the Nevada State Athletic Commission was not going to allow it, but guess what? California was going to allow it. So as a result, not only did they have to move an entire card, but also move an entire fan base that had already bought their tickets. And then on top of that, there were some that just didn't get to watch the fight or totally ruined their Vegas vacation on that December of 2018, or was it 19, or whenever the Alexander Gustafsson fight was happening. And that was all because of John Jones's choices, unfortunately. So once again, these are the objective takes that you have to understand when you are looking at all these matters at hand. A lot of people out there are just giving you one side of the equation and not giving you all sides of the equation. Why? Because they're emotional. And I'm not here to be emotional or try to give you a take that is somehow outrageous or beyond the lines of truth. I'm not here to do that. However, there are times where I will do that for entertainment purposes and for the purposes of really trying to fire up your dopamine simply because that is the business that we are in. But at the same time, I also believe in the integrity of the truth. I believe in the integrity of justice, but I also believe in the integrity of understanding everything in its full spectrum and not just one side. So if you like that and that is the type of content that you like, don't forget to like and subscribe and help grow a channel that will give you all sides of the equation and not just one. Inshallah. I will see you in the next content.